It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
The Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen, and we have two joint practices in the books, Logan. Baltimore, done and dusted. I don't have to drive to Owings Mills anymore, and I, for one, am psyched about it.
That's good. I mean, I didn't drive out there at all, but it is a heck of a trip. I mean, that is a really nice facility. I've been out there for a couple of times. It's so I'm sure it's like fun for you to see that. Have you been out there before? I'm sure
I had not. So the facility itself was super nice. Getting there is just a pain. There's something about driving in the state of Maryland where everything is 5 to 9 mile chunks, and you're like on this highway for a little bit, and then that road for a little bit, and then. As someone who spent a lot more time in the DMV in Virginia, everything's just off the highway. And Maryland, it's like, oh, we got to turn here, turn there. And Owings Mills is obviously up and kind of away from Baltimore. So getting there wasn't the most fun, but being there was great. And to see these two teams get after it for 2 days, 2 really, really good days of work, a lot was accomplished. And I think, going back over it as we were before the show, and obviously we'll share that all with you over the next hour here on Take Command, like some of the takeaways and some of the things you walk away with, I think need to be a little bit re-examined. Or some of the things I walked away with need to be a little bit re-examined. So let's start off with kind of the big picture structure and how these two teams approached these practices based off what you were able to watch of the film, of the live streams, and all the ways that you took in this practice.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting, I think, to kind of sit down and watch it because, I did like a deep dive on the iPad with the first day of film for the offense. Then obviously there were some technical difficulties. Craig, as you know, I'm not the most technically savvy guy, so wasn't able to watch the rest of the practices. But I was able to watch the live streams. And one of the things I took away in terms of comparing what I saw on the iPad with what I saw from the live streams, at least with the first offenses, was that I felt like Baltimore kind of was like trying to win the day a little bit more. Like I felt like EB and this Commanders offense kept it out. I don't say vanilla because it's nothing in the NFL is vanilla, but much more straightforward. Kind of like what you saw in the preseason game in terms of concepts, in terms of point of emphasis. And, I think one of the reasons that's probably true is because I know Ron is very conscientious of what is put on film, what is put on tape. And, to have both these practices live streamed, I'm sure Ron was well aware of that. And he's like, let's keep it to about what we had in the preseason. I think that's what you saw. Like a lot of the runs were the same. A lot of the drop back passes were the same. A lot of the play actions were the same. And so there wasn't anything that was like, oh, wow, like in the same way that you get at practice when you're in Ashburn, right? It was, you see a more fleshed out offense. You see the jet sweeps, you see the reverses, you see kind of these multi-layered concepts. Like that wasn't really going on here. It was very like, hey, this is like day 3 of our 5-step drop stuff. Like, let's run that, And I think obviously like those concepts are great. They're great concepts and they were open in a lot of cases, but they're just easier to match because everyone is familiar with them. Right. And I felt like when you watched Baltimore, especially with the ones, they were doing a stuff that was a little bit more, I'm going to say advanced, like a little bit more comprehensive. Like they're doing these big shifts, like where they, the strength of the offensive formations to the right, and they shift it to the left. They're in these bunches and they're motioning from the bunches. And it's just like, that's kind of next level offense. It's like you're getting all their same stuff, but it's off of all this window dressing. And then I felt like that they were obviously, I think the play action game that they had in Baltimore was very, very crisp. And it makes sense. They're one of the best rushing teams in football. So like this team is going to like sell out, especially like, I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of their good play action stuff came in team run period. And I know a lot of fans are like, what, they're throwing in team run, but that's a very common thing. Like it's like team run kind of encompasses like, you're probably going to run a keeper. You're probably going to run a play pass. You might run a screen, right? Just to kind of keep the team honest. And that's good sound football process. And I will say in Baltimore's period, like those play actions, like the drifts and like kind of the deep middle stuff was like wide open, because everyone's selling out to stop the run. And again, that's part of this process, right? And again, they were in some different formations and stuff that makes it a little bit more challenging. And I also felt like in the team period, especially with the one offense for Baltimore, they were like actually trying to like game plan shots a little bit, and that might just be a feature of the offense is that they're like more vertically oriented. But I feel like they were much more efficient at finding like big chunks as opposed to the Commanders offense, which is a little bit more like, like again, more normal, more vanilla. And I think we've kind of alluded to why that might be why that might be.
Yeah. First of all, I feel smart because there was a point where I was like, I'm pretty sure this is a team run period. And then they threw it and I was like, that's odd. Maybe it's not team run. I feel justified now. It probably was team run, and it was a play action. And I do believe they found Mark Andrews on that particular play that I was like, wait a second, on a play action over the middle.
Also, sorry to cut you off, but that dude is a baller.
Yeah,
that
he's
dude
real
is
good.
so good at football. Yeah, I really I watch a lot of film of him, but I undervalue like how good he is, and seeing him in person or seeing him in this joint practice setting really illuminated like how talented he is. But.
Yeah, and by the way, though, like Cam Curl had a bunch of nice, really good reps. Like that's a tough ask of anybody. But Cam Curl, I mean, like Andrews got him a couple times, and in a game, like I don't know how you grade out the performance because you do give up a couple of big ones, but there's a lot of opportunities for Andrews and Curl to go one-on-one. Both in one-on-ones and obviously in team settings where they wind up matched up. And Curl did a really nice job on a number of them. So obviously encouraging there. But on the kind of the process stuff, I think that's interesting because it does on some level reflect both head coaches. Like Ron is very process oriented. Like, hey, none of this matters. Like we're just here to get better. We're not keeping score. Like it's about getting better for the regular season. And even in how Ron talked about the fights, for instance, he's like, all this does is distract us and take us away from reps that we could be spent getting better. And none of this is going to help us win football games when we get to September. Like stop fighting, stop doing all this other stuff. We're here to get better at our technique and practice. And it's very, very pointed in that way. Sure. Harbaugh's a nut job. Like, competitively, and I mean that as a compliment, right? Like he's, I have no question that there's at least some part of him, if not large part of him, that loved the chippiness in the fights, and he's like, yeah, we're gonna go out there, we're gonna kick some butt, like. I'm under Rivera's skin. Like Ron's getting so mad, and then he goes out in the press, and of course he's like, yeah, Ron, so much respect for him. What a great organization. He does all the head coachy stuff because he's not stupid, but. Harbaugh wanting to win every period, like, speaks to who he is and how they run that program. So if you want to take your next level offense and do more and have that level of risk that someone's going to learn something on a live stream that could hurt you in the regular season, or you just want to take that extra time as opposed to focusing on base fundamentals, like, that wouldn't surprise me for Harbaugh. And I think obviously some fans are going to hear that. Some listeners, viewers are going to hear that and go, well, like, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you try to win? And I don't think that one way of doing it is actually that much better than, or even not even that much, in any way remotely better than the other. It's just being about who you are as a personality, as a team. There are risks with Harbaugh's way. There are risks with Rivera's way of not giving yourself the best chance, but there's also benefits of just nailing down on your fundamentals, focusing on basics versus, overexposing yourself and having too much complication too early on the Baltimore side of things.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised Baltimore showed as much as they did, to be quite honest, because if I'm their week one opponent, I'm like, this is good file for me. They're not going to run all the same plays. They're not going to do all the same stuff, but I'm like, they're going to shift a lot. I'm going to make sure we coach that up. They're going to motion a lot. They're going to be in heavy personnel and 11 personnel more than they've been in years past, right? Like you can see a fundamental shift in who they are offensively. And I will say, for as good as I thought the first team played, and I think the second offensive line, and that's another thing that I just want to call attention to real quick, is just like, I felt like you saw kind of what like a very talented offensive line looks like. Again, like it's just a reminder of like, there are some groups in the league, like seeing Morgan Moses out there and how talented he is and how he kind of, in one-on-ones and in team periods, like just kind of was able to neutralize Montez Sweat. And I know he's trying really hard and it's not like an easy matchup for him, but he looked very comfortable, and then like Zeitler against Payne, like that is to see that, like, again, one of the best guards in the NFL go against one of the best defensive tackles and to see those processes, like that's pretty cool, and then Linderbaum at center and their left guard got absolutely worked by John Allen, like in one-on-ones and in team. And it was like a tough day for him, but But even I think the guy's name's Makari. He's their left tackle, number 65. Like he's the backup left tackle.
Right. Staley did. I know he didn't practice on day 2. I don't think he practiced that much on day 1
practiced
either.
At all. But he like never practices anyway, from what I understand. So,
yeah.
But like that guy played really well, you know. And like then the second group, to see that second group of monsters walk out there. I mean, they've got all these dudes who are like 350 plus on the, you know, like it just is like they've built that team and they've built that offensive line in a very different way. And just to see the matchup there, I thought was really interesting. But like, you know, to that point, like when they're in their heavy stuff, like in their tight first personnels with the heavy offensive line, like it looks really crisp and sharp. And then when you spread out, it looks not quite as good. And I know that's been a point of emphasis for them, is to kind of spread the formations out, increase the dynamism of the passing game. And, you know, they're still working through some stuff too. So it's I think it's just a really interesting kind of, to your point, thought experiment about like, what do you want to prioritize? And I think, you know, like when you think of like, look at what the Commanders did, it's very, very simple, very early install stuff. But I do think that there's value in that because you get to see how guys compete. And I, you know, to that point, like it was great to see like the guys you expect to see win matchups. Like Terry's running hitches and he's beating Marlon Humphreys. You know what I mean? Like he's a competitive SOB and he's physical at the catch point. He's winning on slants. And like, I felt like that was a guy you could go to the bank with, you know, but I think it's also interesting that guys in the second group are like Kemp, you know, guys making plays, guys that are very polished, experienced football players. And the moment's not like this big rah thing. It's like, I'm just a competitive dude. I've been here before. This is a level of competition I'm familiar with, and executed basic kind of offensive principles. So I think that is that's really interesting. And I think, you know, like, again, like when you are playing a team like the Ravens defensively, you do need to like know what they're going to run. Like, it's just like they don't game plan, especially. So like if for example, if Washington's running like their basic RPOs, their Wandas, their powers, their counters, a little bit outside zone with no window dressing, those are easier fits, right? If Baltimore's running all this motion and shifts and it's like, oh, I've added a gap here, now they're adding a gap back, like the dynamic of it is totally different, and there's no prep in the week for it. So again, like it makes sense that Baltimore looked a little bit better because they just did more stuff. And I think and that's not an indictment of the defense, because I felt like the second day they came out and were much better because they were like, oh, this is what we're going to be seeing. This is how we're
they go back, they watch the tape, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what happens. You go back, you watch tape of practice, you review, and you go, hey, if they do this again tomorrow, this is how we're going to handle it. And do you pick it up? And the answer was yes.
Yeah. They had I thought they had a much better second day. And like, I really think it's interesting that like the first play of team, John Allen comes out and just absolutely embarrasses their left guard and like makes a tackle and loss, you know, makes a tackle for loss in the backfield. And it was like, this is the tempo for the day, boys. We are not going to have, you know, tomorrow. And that gives, it wasn't like the first day was bad. Just like, we're going to be this group that's very dominant. And I think they were much more kind of, you know, dotting their I's and crossing their T's on the second day.
Yeah. You know, I think it's interesting you mentioned how like Terry and some of the more experienced guys really come out. I mean, John making that play. We had Terry at the podium after day one. And by the way, the podium for this was there was a nice backdrop and Terry standing in the middle of the field with a microphone. That was our podium makeshift in Baltimore. But you know, I started off the press conference asking him like, you know, hey, what'd you think of being out there? And he just has this giant shit-eating grin on his face of like, I loved it. Like, he loves to compete, and just the smile that he had on his face of getting to go through that was great. But I'll tell you, there's a couple other guys that, as you talk about that, and I try to recall what I saw, like Curtis Samuel, I feel like had a pretty good couple of days. Like, he had a couple of catches in team. I thought he performed very well in one-on-ones. Like, his ability to separate. And again, like, I think some of it comes down to the moment not being too big. I will say this too, like, Jahan didn't win every rep, but like Jahan continued to play well. Like, he is a guy that has a maturity to him and to his game that is well beyond being a second year guy, where I do think like Brian Robinson at times maybe got a little caught up in the emotion. But Jahan, no, his head's on straight, and he just continued to get open, make catches, and do Jahan stuff.
And that's a great point, because, like, you know, Jahan, you know, like, one of the things about him that I really like this year is that he's made some more, like, contested catches. And he had one where he's running, like, I think it's like a 15 or 17 yard, like, stop route. like right inside, like right outside the hash. So kind of in that alley between the numbers and the hash. And the coverage is tight. It's a good route, but the coverage is tight, and he's able to make a nice play there. And then Curtis had like a diving kind of sliding catch on like a mesh concept with a high cross. And, like those plays are like, that's something that I don't really consider as part of his game, or like those tough catches, like where you're kind of body controlling. But he had a couple of those. And so I think it's your point, like that, like, kind of supporting that, like those dudes did come out and do some really nice stuff and execute at a high level. And so it was good to see those three guys do that. Gibson had that kind of really physical run on day one where he like knocks that guy down, and it's like everyone goes, wow, but I do think, the subsequent play, like, he jumps off sides and then they give up a sack the next play after that. And so sometimes I felt like you saw a little bit, I don't want to say immaturity is probably the wrong word, but just like everyone's like in the moment, super excited. On the first day, I think they had 5 false starts, 6 false starts, something like that.
Yeah.
Which again is to me, young guys, getting excited and trying to get the moment kind of being big and very emotional, something new. So, and if you think about it, it's first joint practice for a lot of these guys. So, everyone's going to handle that a little differently. So,
yeah, I do feel like two things I wanted to follow up on there. One, I feel like the Commanders consistently got better as the days went and as the periods went. Like there was a couple times where, the ones went out there, got smoked on the first, set of plays.
Yeah.
They
Like
come
move
back
the
out
ball.
for a second set and they perform better. I feel like they finished better than they started consistently, which is something Ron talked about with Howell specifically on Tuesday, the first day, that he got better as he adjusted to the tempo and things like that. But also on the kind of the maturity front, something that I've talked about on the radio for those that, listen to this podcast and listen to the Pick Six bonus episodes that we put out over the last couple of days. You heard me say, like, I feel like Washington was the more mature team in terms of the physicality and kind of the professionalism is more how I would phrase that, the maturity. Like I thought they were the more professional team and how they handled it. And Baltimore was the one pushing the limit and crossing the line and being overly physical and, doing some stuff that is going to start fights in a joint practice. They were the instigators. But I do think that when you go back over it and you think about the football and how it affects that, there was a lack of maturity, and I don't want to say lack of professionalism, but like a lack of maturity from a football sense in all those false starts where like you'd have some of this stuff blow up and then you'd have a false start or you'd have a missed assignment or things like that. And I think Rivera overall was happy, or at least he wasn't going to give away that he wasn't. But I think overall, like they did fine. This is not me saying like, oh, what an immature football team. Everything I thought was wrong. But it certainly wasn't as clean as maybe I had initially walked away from practice. And I think that's something that happens a lot when you watch practice, in fairness to me, is, those things happen so quickly and there's no scoreboard with down and distance and whatever. So a false start happens, you just get back up and you run the play. In a game, you're now off schedule and you're depending on the situation. If you were in 3rd and 2 and you're now in 3rd and 7, like you've made your day a lot harder. So those things are really, really important and they can often be overlooked in practice. And I'm sure it's something that Rivera and Bieniemy, especially on the offensive side, will be preaching is like, hey, if we get emotional, if stuff happens, if big plays happen, I want you to make sure that you stay steady. And I'll tell you, just to wrap this point, one guy that did a really good job of that was Sam. And he talked about it after practice because I asked him about it. Like, what's your role when things bubble over? What's your, like, how do you handle it when there's a big fight and you got to now get everybody back? And he's like, my job is to get back in the huddle and get everybody to calm down and stay calm and go execute. And I think his demeanor as a young guy continues to impress the hell out of me. And that was just more examples of that over these 2 days.
Yeah, and to that point, I think like you mentioned like he got better as the day went, and like I don't know, like when I watched Team Blitz, I thought I saw a guy who understood like what the period was about. I think he was like 4 for 5 in that period, and like there was a couple where there was free runners, and he on the one incompletion he's throwing the ball away, and I thought like that's something that when we watch Team Blitz here in Ashburn, he always has one where you're like, man, he like didn't see the blitz, or he thought he was picked up, but he wasn't. And I felt like that was the first day where I was like, man, he's like ready to rock and roll. And in this like hyper emotional environment, it's like super easy to be like, oh no, but I felt like he was very calm and very even. And like to the point about the maturity of the team, like I think when you watch practice, it's still very detailed. It's still dialed in. There was just a couple of moments where you're like, everyone's juiced up. You know what I mean? Everyone's kind of excited. And that is a thing that these practices are great for, because it kind of is like a little micro dose of exposure to like a higher intensity, and can guys kind of level out, And so, obviously I wasn't able to watch with the same level of detail the second day as the first day, but I felt like there were some good things the second day that offensively that make you say, okay, they're in the right spot. And again, it's so important to understand that, like, I felt, it'd be interesting to ask EB about this, or Ron. I felt like they didn't have a ton of offense in. So it wasn't like, oh, we're going to like scheme up their, cover two and get this ball here and do all this stuff. It was like, no, run like base stuff. So the throwing windows were tighter. Like, that's life. You know what I mean? So I think overall pretty good. I think defense definitely got way better the second day. I thought they did a good job. And, first day, I think the Baltimore offense came out and they did some unusual stuff that made it hard to be super efficient. But I think overall, I'm not saying that this was a bad practice. I'm not saying that they didn't match the intensity. I'm not saying they didn't match the physicality, which were all big concerns. And so for them to come out and have like a pretty good day, like a B day, both days, I think is good. I think it shows where the team is at, but it also insinuates and I think implies that there's growth still to be had. And I think that's important to remember if you're a fan. It's like, this team is much better than they were last year. They're improving every single day, but they're not there. They're not there yet. But I do think they can get there after watching these practices.
So let's get into it. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Craig Hoffman here, Logan Paulsen there. Let's dive into the offense. We'll circle back to the defense in a little bit. And, of course, I feel like we need to clarify. We're talking about the Washington one offenses. Obviously, both offenses happening at once. And it's so hard to watch these things and try to take away. Yeah. And, you walk away feeling one thing, but if you miss 20 plays on the other field, then maybe you were completely wrong. But to the best of our abilities, let's talk about this one offense for Washington, and let's start with the O-line. That was the biggest question, obviously, going into this. And part of the question was, like, where are they because this Washington defensive line is so good? Like, are they getting their butts kicked on a somewhat regular basis because they're facing the best D-line in football, or because they've got real issues? And I feel like we got some level of answers. I will say for me, Logan, like, my being there initial takeaway was they held up pretty well. I do think that they had some problems on day two in some of the blitz periods, but also that's the nature of the drill. Day two, there's a lot of pressure. That also happened to be where the big fight on that field was someone got through to Sam and touched his helmet, and someone grabbed his helmet, and Antonio Gibson and some others did not take well to that. And it's like, hey, don't touch our quarterback, and that's why you get that's why you get the big blow up there, and Ron absolutely losing it on the offense. But also, like, EB's like, hey, don't touch your quarterback.
Yeah, seriously.
So long story short, like, I do think we saw in the Cleveland game that there are some issues occasionally with pressure with him. That's to be expected for a young quarterback. But the O-line in general is starting to come together, starting to gel, and is hopefully going to be able to get to that average level that we're hoping they get to. We know they're not going to be great, but some of the issues might just be that they're facing John Allen, Daron Payne, Montez Sweat every day.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Baltimore, I thought they overall did pretty good. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so hard in practice to judge, because guys are like, even in a joint practice, especially like Leno is a good example. Like, he's always kind of trying stuff out. You know what I mean? He's like trying on this hat and that. And so I don't know what guys are working on. I don't know what their focus for practice is necessarily. But I will say, like, when you look at the Baltimore defensive line, I thought an interesting matchup was Michael Pierce versus Nick Gates, right? Nick Gates is, the new center, obviously, and Michael Pierce is one of the biggest human beings I've ever seen in person from a width standpoint. He's a big guy. And I remember the first time I saw him, I was in Atlanta. I was like, that guy can't be like a real human. Like, he's just too big. But people
that's two dudes stuffed in a suit.
Yeah, but he's like so quick and athletic for how big he is. And I really thought, like, that was a really interesting matchup, because Baltimore runs like this 3-4. So, like, they play like a true nose, and Pierce is a true nose. So to see Gates kind of have to work that matchup, I thought was really interesting, because I thought, like, in one-on-ones and in team, he did a good job, but there was a little bit more pressure from the center spot than we've seen in practice, and a little bit of that's defensive stylistic thing, right? The other guy that I thought was interesting for Baltimore was Adafeowe, the guy from number 99 from Penn State, who came out the same year as Micah Parsons. And he is a guy that is like, obviously has this athletic freak upside, but has been very quiet. And to see him in person, I felt like he was a guy that is on the borderline of becoming kind of an elite rusher. And again, it's important to note that in this 3-4, you get like wider rush angles, right? So he has got a little bit more space to kind of be more creative with the rush. And I thought, in one-on-ones, he did a good job of like making some of the tackles look silly. But in team, he's a little quieter. But again, there's some pressure. So I think on the whole, it was kind of like what you expected, maybe a little bit better. Like they did a good job picking blitzes up. They did a good job passing up. I think Sadiq had one in team blitz the first day where, they're sliding to the right. The linebacker off the ball that they're sliding to runs to the backside A gap. So they're sliding right. Linebacker hits the left A gap. And I'm pretty sure Sadiq should like pass that off. That's one Sam has to throw away. But I think you feel pretty good about what they did. And again, it's the thing that, again, gets the hairs on the back of your neck standing up a little bit. Just nothing serious, but something to keep an eye on is in these one-on-one situations, is this group consistently good enough at winning those, right? And the good thing about offensive linemen is you don't always have to be in a one-on-one because it's 4 versus 5. So it's like, where does that help go? And I have backs and tight ends to help out with that stuff. But that's something that I'm always like, with this group this entire offseason, it's like, are they good enough to consistently win one-on-ones? And this practice, I thought they were like at like a 75, 70-ish% win rate, which is good. But like, is that good enough to kind of carry you? I guess it would be my question. So.
Right. Here's my question for the offensive line. Can they do it without holding? Can they do it without penalties? And that is one thing that
which they were pretty good at. There were refs there.
There were, and I don't think that there were many calls, if any, that I can remember. I'm sure there were at some point, but it's something that I was on with the Junkies earlier this week, and they were asking me about. And like I said, like in a practice setting, it's easy to blow past that stuff. And honestly, for like holding and stuff, it's even easier when you don't have referees at practice. It's one thing when the refs are there and they throw the flag and you're like, okay, that was a hold. But unless you see it with your own eyes, and you might be watching a wide receiver DB matchup, like you don't know how much of that stuff happens inside of the line at any given practice where there's no referees. And so understanding, kind of the proficiency of your O-line without being able to hold, without, illegal hands to the face, without these things that absolutely kill drives is damn near impossible unless you go back and watch every single matchup on tape and be like, oh, that guy held there, that guy didn't, whatever, which obviously I don't have the access to do, nor the time, nor the desire. But it is something that once you get in games, like, is super important. And for a guy specifically in Andrew Wiley, who is one of the more penalized linemen in the league, and had 2 penalties, one of which resulted in a safety in the game 1 against Cleveland. Like, being able to do this stuff cleanly is a concern. And I think that as it comes together and we get obviously into the games, and I hope we see them. I think we'll see the starters against Baltimore in the preseason, and then we'll see when we get to Arizona, or when Arizona comes here. Like, that is something that I'm going to have concerns until we're into the season and it's been clean for a couple games, just because we don't have the ability to get the data on that beforehand. But it's something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. But clearly, even with that said, like, this line is getting better.
Yeah, and I think to the holding point, like there was 1 or 2 maybe with Wiley where I was like, is that a hold? But I think, like when you watch the practice, there are clean pockets. And like I mentioned, I think the more glaring matchup was Nick Gates and Pierce. And I think even though Pierce was getting good pressure, like pushing and collapsing the pocket, I thought Gates, gave Sam enough opportunity to like step up and move around and do some things in there that were good. So even though like it looks like when you watch it, that was one of the days I got to watch on the iPad, like the ability for them to kind of keep the pocket width, I thought was good. So, and in team, like Wiley's pretty good, you know what I mean? Against a good rusher and Adafeowe. So, I do think it's something definitely to keep an eye on. And I think it's something to keep an eye on in this game, because I would imagine the starters will play a fair amount. I don't know that, I'm just speculating, but I think,
Ron has given that indication. So,
Oh, yeah, okay, good.
they whatever it's worth though, they will not be playing Baltimore starters. Baltimore's playing no one.
Yeah, well, they don't like to do that anyway.
Yeah,
they've got enough like sneaky depth where you feel like that's okay for them. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's just like that team is so deep. Like watching their one-on-ones, I'm like, their backup, their third string left tackle is probably a starter for some teams in the NFL. It's just weird how they've been able to accumulate all these like talented players. I don't know. It's just like their roster construction is always super interesting to me because like their two backup tight ends are pretty good football. You know what I mean? It's just like they've got like weird sneaky depth. Anyway, but yeah, so I think that'll be good. And I think what you'll see is the guys that are going to play much better. Like every week, every single day, they get better and they improve. So people are concerned about the O-line. I'm less so concerned. I think that group's going to be better than people think. And I think once the game plan stuff goes in and EB's, working the magic and you get some of those unusual formations and motions and pre-snap sets, it's just going to help that group out when you're calling screens the way you want to call screens. And I think it's not going to be quite as big. It'll be an issue, but it's not going to be like it's an issue like it is for every single team. But I don't think it's going to show up in the same way down in and down out the way I think some people think. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right, so what did Sam do with those pockets, and how did Brissett look? The newsy item, if you will, is I asked Rivera. So I'll give the background of how this went down. Like we had the press conference, ask Ron how things are going, ask him about the O-line, ask him about Sam, and he's very complimentary of Sam in a way that I don't feel like he usually is. Not that he's not complimentary of Sam, but he typically always works in like Jacoby and Fromm, and he's like always very team oriented. And he was kind of more pointed in complimenting Sam. And I was like, I wonder if he's trying to tell us something. Yeah. And obviously Anthony Richardson was just named the starter in Indy. You have that starting to happen around the league where teams are naming their QB1s for the season. And so I just straight up asked, I was like, hey, Ron, other teams are starting to name their starting quarterbacks for the season. Are you at a point where you're ready to do that? And he goes, no, not yet. I have to talk to EB and Tavita, but like Sam's done a great job. Jacoby's also done a great job. We feel really good about our quarterback room. So that's kind of the newsy item. But how did Sam actually perform to the? My guess is well enough that he's probably going to be named QB1 for the season on Friday.
Yeah, no, I think that feels right. I mean, is it perfect at practice? No, but I think you're seeing like a maturity from him. And I think coupling today or the two joint practices, with the preseason game where he came out and I think did some stuff that you were hoping he would do, like in terms of extending plays, getting the ball out of his hand. And, was he perfect? No. Was he perfect in these practices? No. But I think you saw, again, like a playmaking ability that this team hasn't had at the quarterback position in a long time. And you're willing to kind of take some of those, in between lumps, I would say, because the other stuff is so good. And I think that's right. And I think when, Ron is being complimentary, like he deserves it, man. He's done a really nice job this offseason. And he did a nice job in these practices. Like I mentioned the team blitz period already, which to me was great. Showed a lot of maturity on his part. And I think, Jacoby did some really good stuff, but it's just so stylistically different with Jacoby. Like, he's going to hang in there and manipulate safeties and do some stuff that's a little bit kind of veteran-ish, but he's holding the ball a long time, and I think there's an urgency to his play, which I like. There's a confidence to his play, which I like. And he seems to have good chemistry with the guys we mentioned who had good days, Terry, Sam, or Curtis, and Jahan. Mm-hmm. And then we haven't even mentioned Cole Turner, who I thought had a very mature, like nothing crazy, but just caught the ball. He just
was good. He just made a lot of catches. Like I feel like every time I looked up, I feel like it was a lot of times when I wasn't watching that field, like when I was watching the defense field, I would look up and kind of peer over to the offense field, and there'd be another catch for Cole Turner. Yeah,
and I think that's right. And and so I think like there's a good mature group there. I think like we mentioned, the offensive line's getting better. The backs were kind of quiet, I thought, this week a little bit. And, we're getting off point with Sam a little bit. But, yeah, my point with Sam is that I think if he were to announce – if Ron was to announce it today for whatever reason, I think he'd be like, yeah, that feels right. Yeah. Based on the preseason game, based on these two practices, based on the practices he's had prior to that, like he's matured well. And all that kind of stuff about, he was potentially going to be the first round pick, blah, 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 all this stuff. Like you see some of that stuff. And again, it's not perfect, but it's never perfect. And I think you see it's like it's that thing, that je ne sais quoi, that like the magic it factor. When you're with like a good quarterback, it's just something about it. Like I just think back to when I was with Matt Ryan, or when I was with, Deshaun Watson before everything went crazy. Like there's a confidence, and it's like where confidence meets ability. And I think you're starting to see that with Sam. So like, that's what I would say is like, yeah, he deserves that opportunity. So,
yeah, I mentioned earlier in the pod his demeanor, his maturity, like the way he handled all the chaos of the 2 days. He just keeps going. And like, I think what's great about Sam is like he's going to make mistakes. That's not the great part, but he's going to make mistakes because he's young and it's the NFL and it's hard. Even the best make mistakes sometimes, but he just keeps going. And there is a stubbornness that I mean is a positive that is really, really impressive and not necessarily common even amongst good quarterbacks. I mean, like we watched the quarterback show on Netflix and saw Kirk, occasionally like really get frustrated. I watched that here in person, as did you. Like, and that's not to say like Kirk is bad or mentally weak or anything. Like he's human. And Sam has almost this superhuman like ability to just not get flustered. And for a young guy that's going to make some mistakes, that's essential. And to not, and I think it's not just like outwardly expressing anger, right? Mm-hmm. It's not losing confidence and going back under center or getting in the gun, getting the next snap and executing like you're supposed to. And making good, clean decisions and not letting your brain get sped up and get overwhelmed. Like there's such a psychological element to playing quarterback that involves clear-headedness so you can process information quickly. And I think he's got that in a major, major way. And then you also see some of these throws where he's like rolling left, sidearm back right with velocity. Or there's one ball he completed to Jahan, I think at the end of day one, where there's this little token, kind of RPO-ish looking fake in the backfield. It holds Kyle Hamilton just a second. And then he lasers, I think it's a speed out to Jahan. Maybe it was a sit route. But Hamilton tries to break on it, and he just fastballs it by him. And, I told the story on the radio, but I was standing there with Zach Selby, writer for Commanders.com. I go, Zach, if that's Heineke last year, that's a pick six.
Yeah.
Like, the arm strength, you can beat people with your arm. Not that you want to get a habit of it, but, like, it opens up the offense to more possibilities. And when you have that kind of natural talent. And from the mobility where he does pick up a couple of first downs with his legs throughout the practices, to his ability to escape, to make throws on the run, to just sit back there and dart someone. Like there's a lot of potential there. And so I think the only reason Ron hasn't named him the starter yet, and again, like we all said all summer long, like wait till the joint practices are over and then they'll name a starter. As long as everything's gone according to plan, it has. They just have to sit down, go over the tape of the second day of practice, and Ron didn't want to do that or name a starter before talking to EB and Pritchard and saying, hey, I'm going to tell the press and everybody that Sam is the starter, which is the professional, proper way to handle that. But it would not surprise me if Ron, who speaks before practice on Friday morning, opens up the press conference before questions and says, hey, guys, just want to let you know Sam Howell will be our starter week 1 against Arizona and for the rest of the regular season.
I mean, do you think he waits till after the second preseason game?
He could. But I don't think.
I probably would if I was him. I don't know.
Why would you do that? I don't disagree. I'm just curious.
Just another data point. Like, hey, you've done a really good job. Like, and it's such a close proximity to that data point. What is it? 4 days out. So it's like, why? Like, let's play the game. It's good. I'm assuming it's going to go well. But if it's like a garbage fire, then I want to be able to like, okay, I'm glad I didn't say that. You know what I mean? Like it's just.
Well, but I guess my counter to that would be we have so many data points at this point, and the data you're going to get in a preseason game is so limited. Like I asked Kendall about missing the first game because Kendall spoke to us after practice as well, and he goes, one series is not going to make or break my preseason or my prep for the regular season, and so you've got. At this point, thousands of plays that you've run in practice. Maybe not thousands for Sam, but hundreds for Sam. And then you're going to judge it based off of 2 to 3 series in the preseason. Like, I just think that even if it is a dumpster fire, I don't think it's that close between Sam and Jacoby either. It's not like Jacoby has been, right on his heels when you factor in the curve of Sam's upward mobility potential, the fact that he could be the guy for the future. Like, I just don't think that the race is close enough, if you will. And so there's also a part of me that's like, hey, let's give him that spotlight. We're on Monday Night Football. Like, we want people talking about our guy. Like, we want everyone to know, like, this is our guy, and we have the confidence in him. Hey, Joe Buck, Sam Howell's our starting quarterback. Introduce him that way on the broadcast.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, you always think about it from that. To me, it's just like when I'm making evaluations, like, and I have one more free data point that is, I think to Kendall's point, a guy, what is he, in year 8? Like, yeah, it doesn't really matter. The series doesn't matter, right? And obviously Baltimore is going to treat this game a little bit differently than the Commanders. But I just want to, like, for a guy with such little experience as Sam, like, why not get one more data point is my point. And it doesn't really, like, why rush to make the announcement in my book? Like, I think everybody probably feels the same way you feel. Everyone in the building probably feels the same way you feel. Like I'm if he made the announcement tomorrow, I'd be like, cool, great, like, awesome, because I think he deserves it. But again, like, would I be surprised if Ron or the staff is like, let's give him one more look and make sure everything's copacetic?
No, I guess my point would be, what could possibly happen in the preseason game from a performance standpoint that changes my mind?
Yeah,
and I'm at the point where nothing. If the answer is nothing,
right?
Then it's like a match play golf where you're up 4 holes with 3 to play. They don't play the last 3 holes. They just call the match. Yeah. And so at that point, I think that's how I would handle it. Anything else from the offense? I think we probably should touch on the backs real quick. Like, they were kind of quiet.
Yeah.
And also, like, 1 or 2 quick notes from me on some of the day 2, like, individual drill stuff. Chris Rodriguez was awesome in one-on-one pass pro, and the other 2 backs, granted, like, Brian Robinson was not good. He was also facing Roquan Smith in a one-on-one pass pro drill with no help and whatever.
It's a tough drill.
Yeah, that's tough sledding,
especially if you don't do that drill a lot. It's really hard.
Which they don't.
Yeah, it's really hard to get up, like, physically for that drill, because usually there's all these parameters, like, hey, you can't, like, I know when we run it here, or when we used to run it when I was on the team, you can't bull rush, right? And, like, Roquan first play is like bull rush and B-Rob, and it's like, did B-Rob even
and
know
you have a running head start? Like, it's not fair.
Did
but Chris Rodriguez,
was,
he's stoned his dude twice, like 2 reps each, and he was awesome. I think Gibson split his reps. Again, Robinson got bulled, but, like, Roquan Smith gets a running head start to run into you, like, unless you're Trent Williams.
And you can't cut, right? Like, you can't cut in those drills. And in the game, like, you can't, there's always, so that's the thing about that one-on-one pass pro drill. Like, usually, like, you can't bull because the back can't cut. And so, like, they tried to move him up. They tried to limit the space, but I'm like, still, like, this favors the linebacker. You know what I mean?
In a major way.
Yeah.
But I guess my thing was, if Rodriguez is a guy who you can trust, and Alex Arma also was fantastic in that drill, as you would imagine as a fullback.
He's a big guy.
Like, I do wonder, in certain situations, if those guys find themselves on the field in 3rd down for some more max pro type of stuff, depending on the route concept, the combination. It's just another option in EB's bag that I thought was interesting. But his runners, his pass catchers, like, what did you see from the backs on, I would say, quieter days for them?
Yeah, quieter days. And so I will say, on the first day, I thought they ran the football well. I thought they blocked runs well. I thought the double teams were good. I thought the RPOs were executed well. I thought decisions from the quarterback on RPOs were great. I think the guy that stood out to me probably the most was Chris Rodriguez as a runner. And again, like, a little bit of it is there was I think it was a power. So, like, tight end to the right, they're in a single back formation. The guard's trying to kick out the end. And the guard, if this would have happened to me, I would have been pretty pissed, I think. But he kind of, like, falls into Chris Paul's legs, which is, like, I don't want to say dirty, but, like, it would have bothered me as a player if that would have happened. So there's a big pile, and he kind of cuts off that and then just powers into the pile. And there's a little crease there, but he ends up getting probably 6 yards on that. And you can tell the Baltimore guys are, like, trying to stop him. And I was like, that's where that kind of sneaky power comes in. He had a Wanda, so running away from the tight end, kind of outside zone, where he's able to kind of get in the crease, and a guy tries to come and punch the ball out and just totally gets spun out because he's not expecting how strong he is. And I thought, there's a guy who is kind of hitting his stride at the right time. And he got a lot of reps. He got more reps than normal. He did have a false start. Got to point that out. But I think he's that physicality in the pass protection, that physicality running the football, I think is going to get him on the field. Like, just knowing EB and talking with EB, not about Chris, but just, like, understanding EB's mindset. Like, I think that's stuff he values, and you're going to see him on the field a little bit more maybe than I thought when they drafted him. I thought I liked him as a player. He was one of my favorite running backs, but like just to see kind of him in the preseason, him in this joint practice, the physical mindset, and the fact that it seems to be transferring, I think is pretty cool. So, again, B-Rob didn't practice a ton. Gibson didn't practice a ton. It was mostly the young guys. I'm sure they're probably, a little bit concerned about injuries and things like that. But Chris Rodriguez definitely stuck out to me in that capacity.
Yeah, no, he's had a good week here, and we'll see. I imagine that's going to extend into a good 10 days in the preseason game because that dude's a gamer, and when you got to actually tackle him, good luck.
Good luck. Yeah, and so the other thing I wanted to point out with the young guys is Stromberg, right? He played guard pretty much the whole time, and he did a really nice job, I thought. I wasn't sure if he could play guard. I was a little skeptical because he doesn't have like ideal guard length and strength. But in the team setting, so he's working with the twos at right guard, and he's working in one-on-ones. And I thought, man, like this guy's having a pretty gosh darn good day, I think, and that was pretty impressive to me. Like the fact that he came out there, he's working with Tyler Larson. They got great combinations. They had a nice little combination where Jonathan Williams would have squirted out for probably a 10-yard gain. And like his hat's in the right spot, his hands are in the right spot, pass pro was clean. And I thought, in a pinch, like if you're going to keep him on the 53 and he didn't play guard, like that is now on the table. And obviously I want to see him do it in the game setting, obviously. But in terms of guys that I thought really, really helped their stock out, he's got to be, if he's not at the top of the list, he's got to be pretty darn close. So I just wanted to bring him up real quick.
By the way, did you see your boy Braden Daniels, the one-on-one rep where he got trucked?
That is like
credit to him. He bounced back. They ran it back with the same dude, and he did a good job on the second rep. But he just got in a bad spot, and it almost happened in slow motion because he like got down in his stance and he kept backpedaling, and there's no contact. And basically, the Baltimore rusher just waited till there was enough space and was like, "I have room to accelerate now," and then bowled him literally straight over.
It was a sneaky rush too. Like you don't see like that. So like that's the problem about doing these joint practices. I'll tell you is they've got some really like twitchy pass rushers deep on that Baltimore depth chart. And so that guy comes out and does like, I don't even know what I'd call it. He like pops straight up, like he almost jumps, like does like a vertical jump. And Braden Daniels is like, like you can tell he's like, what the hell are you doing? And kind of like he drops his hands. And then, dude, when his feet hit the ground, just hits him with a bull. And I've not really seen that. I've seen Vaughn do stuff like that where you kind of raise your shoulder pads, to like act like you're doing a move and then hit a bull. But I thought that's a pretty sneaky rush for a guy who's like your fifth pass rusher. You know what I mean? But Braden Daniels, like that's a tough rep. Like that sucks.
But how do you bounce back? And he did. They ran it back and he did a good job. Won the rematch. So and that's a hard.
They did 2 rematches. He won both, so good for him. And then in team, like, dude, as a pass protector, he's still figuring it out. But I think you're starting to see some of the athleticism as a run player. Like they had a counter where he's like is on the linebacker before the linebacker even moves his feet. And like those are the types of things that get me going. All right, like you drafted him because he's a good athlete. You're starting to see the good athlete stuff because he's like not thinking so much. Like, can we get that athleticism to translate to the pass protection? But as a run player, he's starting to become like, this is the kind of guy Kyle Shanahan would love because he's so fast to the second level. So I'm like, like we're starting to see signs of life, which is good. So hopefully that continues and he becomes a ball player. You know what I'm saying? But I do think like in terms of trajectory, it was pretty like there was no pulse for a while, and now we got something, right? We pushed Epi, we're ready to rock and roll, and I think. Keep an eye on that guy, especially in the last couple of preseason games, because I think he's playing better. Andre Jones, I thought had a nice week. He got some reps.
Yeah, let's get to the defense in total, and Andre Jones is a name that we definitely need to talk about. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. That's Logan Paulsen. I'm Craig Hoffman. So let's get into the defense. And the defensive line has become fascinating because somehow, Logan, they are outperforming expectations because there are more dudes that are good. They had too many good players. And the way that they are going about this, I think, is pretty fascinating. James Smith-Williams spent a ton of time inside. to allow Andre Jones a little bit more time outside, including on day 2, reps with the ones for the second round pick with Chase Young still out with the stinger. So Jones opposite of Montez Sweat. James playing inside. FA was inside, outside quite a bit. And obviously the main 3, Duran, John, and Montez, all did Duran, John, and Montez stuff. Yeah. This group looks so good right now.
Yeah, and Andre Jones, I think, deserves like a ton of credit, man. He's playing good football right now. Like it's not all. I think the consistency is the thing that gets you going. But like one of the things we talked about when they drafted him is like he physically fits this mold of like an elite edge rusher. He's got 34 and I think a 1/4 inch arms, just long arms. He's like 255 pounds. He's kind of like big in the upper body. He's got some different kind of moves, in the one-on-ones. He's got this vicious spin move that he throws in every once in a while. He's still figuring stuff out in terms of like how to be a polished rusher, but he does flash bend. He does flash play strength. He does flash good length. And so I kind of get why they're doing that. And then, James rushing inside has some production off of line stunts. Casey had rushing against Ben Cleveland, who they're trying out to tackle Baltimore. I'm talking about. Who's been a guard. He's this massive guard. He's like 6'6", I want to say he's 360. Casey has some good speed rushes off the edge on him. So it's so funny because when you think, this guy's out of here, he's boned or whatever it is, like dudes start making plays. Like James made some plays, Casey made some plays, Andre made some plays, FA made some plays. So the bottom half of that group I don't know what the heck they're going to do. Because right now, to me, if you're looking at the D-line, you got your 4 dudes, right? Obviously, Chase, Allen, Payne, Sweat. Yeah. That's pretty obvious, right? And then you go Big Phil, Ridgeway, I think.
Well, that's where I think I start to wonder, like, are Ridgeway and Big Phil guys that you just go, that's duplicate skill sets, and we're looking to get more James Smith-Williams on the field and F.A. Obata on the field, and so we're going to play them inside, and that's, sorry, John, you're gone again.
Yeah, I don't know. It is really interesting, I think, because you don't know. And then it's like F.A. seems to have like been a lock for the roster. Like he seems like he's locked in, right?
He's 100% locked in. And, right? And by the way, he was the other main guy getting 1 reps opposite. Like the first time they would line up without Chase, F.A. would be the guy on the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know. It's just really interesting now because you got, like you said, James is playing inside. He's doing a good job. I don't know. Like I felt like I had a pretty good grasp of that, but over the last like probably 3 practices, it's like, where's this going? I have no idea. But that guy deserves a ton of credit. Did a good job. And
at this point, I feel pretty confident saying Jones is making the team because not only is he playing well as a rusher, but he's a teams guy. Like he's got straight line speed that is helpful on punt and kick coverage. Yeah. And so getting him on the roster and having him active on game day, not only do you get a little bit of extra pass rush juice, but like you get a guy who's very good and helpful on special teams, and he's played teams. He played it in college. So this is where I don't know what they do with KJ Henry because it's not like he's been bad, but he hasn't been as good as Jones.
And he hasn't showed up the same way. He hasn't been as consistent in terms of making plays for sure. Yeah, so I don't know. Like that's something that those are tough decisions, and a good football player is not going to make this team. So, that's kind of a bummer for whoever that is because right now a lot of those dudes are playing good football. And these are the days like we're like, man, I'm really glad I'm not the D-line coach or the scout making this decision because that's a tough sled, man. Because I will say, like, my one question to you would be, like, we know that he's good because we watch him in practice all the time. I'm talking about Andre Jones. But, like, do you think – and he played fine against Cleveland, but it wasn't like, oh, my gosh, this guy's got to make the team. Do you think they could sneak him to practice squad? I don't think they would want to, but I'm saying like just because he's not like a big name. He was, a 7th round pick, obviously.
Yeah, I probably because he was a 7th rounder, but also like I don't know that I'd want to because like I think I actually want him on the team. Yeah, I agree. It's not about just like can we keep him and stash him and he's going to be inactive every week. Like I want that dude up. Like he's going to be in uniform for 17 games hopefully this year.
Very different than Kadarius Toney was. Like you see a path for him to like play. Not Kadarius, Shaka Toney.
Right.
Shaka Toney, right. You see like a path for him to play. Like Shaka was on the roster, but like
in the hopes that he would develop in the future.
Right. But I feel like Dre is he's there. So there is there being a relative term. Like he could play football for you if you needed to.
And Ron, by the way, was asked about it afterwards, and he's like, yeah, he's been surprising it. I don't think Ron would just admit it if they weren't planning on keeping him. Like you don't say like, hey, this dude's an NFL football player, then try to sneak him into the practice squad. You say that because you're like, yeah, we're not letting anybody else touch this dude.
Yeah.
So the question becomes like, is KJ Henry able to get through the practice squad, or is John Ridgeway a guy that you can cut and get to the practice squad, or someone else sign him? But Ridgeway played so well last year in actual NFL games that that's probably going to be hard. And I would try to be keeping Ridgeway just because Big Phil hasn't ever stayed healthy in his 2 years. He's got the calf thing right now and didn't practice these couple of days. So,
and that's where someone gets the phantom, hamstring pull, the 2 days before cut day, and like you say, oh, you're on IR now, bud. Sorry. Like,
right.
So we'll see if anything like that, any shenanigans happen like that. But in terms of other young guys that I thought deserve a shout out, and we missed this when we were talking about the offense. So real quick, we'll come back to defenses. Tinsley, I thought like he's been a guy that's been getting a lot of buzz, like from coaches and stuff, but you haven't really seen it in practice. And I felt like he showed up and practiced well. You know what I mean? Had like a good practice, running good routes, getting open, creating separation. So like as a guy that is competing again for that 6th, 7th receiver spot, I would put his name in the bucket and compare him to like Casimir Allen, who, like we talked about, had like a very physically impressive day in terms of speed and quickness. Like just didn't finish plays the same way Tinsley did. So I would just say like, there's a maturity with Tinsley that I think is something to be valued, I would say.
Yeah, actually, I wanna talk about the Kaz Allen Dax Milne question in take 5. So we'll do that as a little bonus for everybody tomorrow, because we had an interesting conversation amongst a couple of the media folks on the sideline that I think is interesting, and I'm curious your take on. So we'll cover that there in terms of the last receiver spot. But as far as the rest of the defense, I feel like Jamin had a pretty mixed couple of days.
Jamin's first day was I don't want to say not good, but not great. I'll say, kind of middle of the road. I felt like there was a couple times where it's like he's like there was a specific like where it's like Andrews is running to the flat, and then the outside guy's running like a post, and they're obviously like setting up a wheel, and Jamin just kind of like stops covering him like middle of the route, and you're like, what's going on? And he had a couple of those where it's like, he's matched up on a back, and the back, is running to go. And and again, like Jamin's a guy that needs to see it and he needs to talk about it in terms of route concept. And I felt like the second day he came out and played much better. I thought physically, in terms of like fit and runs and being where he's supposed to be in that standpoint, he did well both days, but I felt like his coverage got better on the second day, and so like, again, like in the game, you're not going to get that like, oh, first day's out, next day's in. So that was something.
But you do watch tape throughout the week.
Yeah,
so that's kind of the balance of like, you might not see it. I mean, I guess your scout team will run it, but like if it comes down to like how well do your coaches and your scouts like get the advance right, and that's not an ideal situation for a player. You got to be able to go out and play. Like if he's seen it, he'll be great. If he hasn't, yikes. That seems to be kind of what you're saying.
I think also it's important to note that like he's been really impressive, like damn near perfect in practice. So like maybe that's why some of those mistakes are a little bit more glaring in one of the practices. Like I said, I think he got better the second day, but maybe that's why, because like he's been awesome. He's been really, really good, and so to see that kind of hiccup was a little bit surprising. But I guess everyone's entitled to an off day.
For sure. Definitely. And then secondary wise, I mean, there's a lot of talk about Forbes. He had, some tough one-on-one reps. Kind of making their way. But like,
just talk about that for a second?
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say is like one-on-ones are designed for the offense to win, and especially the offense to win if they want to take a DB inside towards the middle of the field where there would typically be help. And every single one of everyone being like, oh, he got smoked. It's like, the dude ran a triple move where the quarterback would have been sacked and then ran to where the help would be.
And also all those are in the red zone, like red zone one-on-ones. So like, yes, like it's just so frustrating when fans get all crazy about it. Cause like red zone, you're going to run quarters, like red quarters all the time. So there's going to be a dude standing like right there. Like if you want to run in, like good luck, you're going to be dead. You know what I'm saying? Like like it just doesn't work that way. Like go run in there. Fine. Get smoked by that guy. Get smoked by Foster or whoever, or Cam Curl. So it's always super frustrating. And like in those man situations, like in the red zone situations, you'll see the quarterback hold the ball longer because it's like they're running a dig, they're running an out, they're running and if anything, the pressure is more acute in the red zone. So the ball has to be out quicker. So it's like all this stuff. And it's just like, and so what I will say is I thought his reps were competitive. I thought he was in relatively good position. Did he lose a couple reps? Yes. But I don't think that situation is entirely realistic. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
100%. As for some of the other stuff, I mean, he does let Beckham behind him, but he does show the great makeup speed. I mean, he's a guy that's going to play in trail position, and if a quarterback is going to loft one perfectly over his very long outstretched arms, he will take that. He's also going to make, I think, more plays on that. But I think it is concerning.
Beckham,
he's.
I guess
still good.
I slept on how good he is still because, like, he's been hurt all this time, but like he's a good football player still.
He's so good, savvy, fast. I mean, and people forget just how freakishly athletic he was at his prime, and he's still pretty damn athletic. But yeah, I mean, I do think there's some times where it's like, man, that is a lot of separation, even if you have your good makeup speed. And that's going to be the question when we get into the regular season is like, do some of those gambles pay off for the offense in a big way, where he gives up some big plays? Overall, anybody else that's worth highlighting on the secondary? I feel like Holmes made a couple of plays, continues to be super physical. That's great. What else?
He had a late punch out in the red zone, which is good. He also had one where he got called for holding, little ticky tack, and then he had one where like the receiver obviously like pushed off him, and he like turned to the ref like in the middle of the play and was like, "What are you looking at?" And the guy ran for like a big play. So I'm like, come on, bro. Like, I get what's going on here. It's practice, but like, don't do that. You know what I mean? Like,
keep playing.
Tag the guy off and do whatever you're doing. So there's that. I think Cam Curl deserves a lot of credit. Matching up with Mark Andrews, you already alluded to that. He did a really nice job. And then Fuller, I think a lot of people are like, oh, Fuller had a tough day. But I think overall, like, he made some plays were made on him, but that's kind of who he is at the moment. Like, he's in good position. He's going to make good plays. But like, he's not a perfect defensive back, So like, also St. Just, I thought had a pretty good day. There was a couple there. There was a one-on-one with Zay Jones, which again is like making it around the Twitterverse right now. But like again, those are red zone routes. That's not how it's going to play out in real life. So I think overall they did a pretty good job. Like I said, conceptually there were some concepts that Baltimore ran that just breaks rules for this group. Like they ran like a double in concept and the back runs to the flat in a weird 3x1 off of motion. And it's like, the linebacker's probably got to match that dude, but like he sees the first in and they pass it off in their man match. The corner has to then match the flat and they don't match it right. They do like a cross release.
Was Quan the nickel on that one?
I think so.
Yeah, I remember that play and just thinking like that's something happened there that was not supposed to be. Like, Quan's the closest defender, but that doesn't feel like it was supposed to be on him. There should have been someone else there.
Yeah, and so what they usually do is like usually they just match the back with the linebacker. But if it's a true zone match, at least in the ones I've seen, and again, like determining their zone match is like in the rules is like damn near impossible. But like on a crossing route, usually you would pass that to the linebacker, and then the guy who's on the crossing route would take the back. Right. But it happens so fast that it doesn't seem like the right way to handle it. So, but again, like that's a concept that, especially with a younger DB and maybe a young linebacker, I don't know who's in linebacker, is just hard to defend. They run like that silly, like they run a wheel with Mark Andrews and a post by what's his face, Beckham. And they don't pass it off correctly. I think our offense doesn't really run a ton of that stuff. So it makes sense that they're going to have a hard time with some of these concepts that they don't see every single day in practice. But I think overall, like, especially the second day, I thought the defense did a good job. I thought, given the parameters of the first day for the defense, I think it went about as I would expect. And I think, like John Allen is John Allen. And that was cool to see him just be dominant in his one-on-ones, dominant in team. Also interesting, like Montez Sweat was a little bit quiet going against Morgan Moses, who again is like a top 12 offensive tackle in the NFL, which I thought was kind of surprising because I think, we're very high on Montez and I think he's poised for a big year, but how does he handle like better competition? And I think that was maybe an insight into that, but I do think he's a guy who wins a lot with effort rushes, and you don't get a lot of those in practice, obviously. So
yeah, there were even some periods where like there was a move the ball period that like ended in them attempting field goals. That
I think it was 2 minutes.
2 minute, yeah, and the
rush
was definitely
very
not
quiet.
live.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not
like
live rush,
that was weird because it was like Lamar was so chill, and it's like, yeah, you are like I know you're good and you're comfortable and you're Lamar Jackson MVP. And by the way, watching Lamar in person was impressive. He's so good.
He was really good. Yeah,
but his body language said, "I am not getting remotely touched. Not even fake. I'm wearing a black jersey and they can't touch me. Like he was just chilling, which I thought was interesting. It's like, yeah, no, 2 minute. I'm pretty sure they're going to pass rush. But all right, anything? We're gonna Alex. Let me pass along one special teams note real quick because I had a one-on-one conversation with Rivera about it, and then on the punt return side of things, in take 5, we'll talk about Dax Milne versus Kaz Allen, and kind of that last receiver spot and how punt return plays into it. So bonus episode tomorrow on that. But we've talked about Cameron Cheeseman and the low snaps, and there was definitely a couple of those on day 1 of practice, including, I believe, on the kick that Joey Sly missed by a mile, like one of the worst missed field goals I've ever seen from an NFL kicker. There's like no way that was a clean operation because he missed it so badly. And so I asked Ron after the presser, I was like, hey, are you worried about this at all? And he says, no. And I was like, I know that he's working on stuff. He's like, yeah, like, he's working on it. We have full faith. Like he's working on it. It's fine. Like those snaps are low. We've told him, hey man, you got to get it up. You got to get it back to the knee. And I brought up the punt snap as well in the game that was low. He's like, yep, we saw that for sure. And so I asked him like, hey, what's the deadline? Like you obviously you got to let guys work through stuff when they're trying out new techniques. But there is also a deadline. The line I used on the radio is the calendar waits for no one.
Right.
That season opener is coming no matter what. And he said, I would say kind of this game. Like he's got to, we want to see good, clean snaps in the game. And if not, then we start to maybe worry a little bit. So I thought that was worth passing along. It's an interesting thing that a guy that seemed to be pretty good at a position where, just do your job is the most true. Right. There's no extra to do as a long snapper. Is tweaking with his technique. I don't really get it, but I'm also not a special teams coach. I'm not a long snapper. I have no expertise in the area.
Right.
I'm just a guy who talks about football on the radio. So I hope that Cheese gets his technique down and we have good, clean snapping. And this is the last we talk about the long snapper for the year.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so too. It's did he say what he's working? Has he said what he's working on? That'd be interesting to find out.
I mean, I guess I've put myself in like long snapper reporting duty at this point, so maybe I'll talk to Cheeseman next week.
Yeah, just ask him because like that's something because like I have long snapped, and again, not to the level of what they're doing, but it'd just be interesting to hear like, is it his snapback? Is it how the ball's leaving his hand? It just would be interesting to hear like what he's tweaked and why he's tweaked it and. To keep an eye on it in the game, I guess,
Yeah, no, definitely keep an eye on it in the game. All right, that is it. Unless you have anything else to add, we've only been podcasting for an hour.
I think we've covered like everything. If there's something we didn't cover, please leave a comment, and then we will we'll address it at some point.
Cover it next week. Speaking of next week, I think we'll probably get through the game to do a pod. So Tuesday morning, I would anticipate us podding again. So look for it as early as we can on Tuesday in terms of turning around on the edit. But yeah, Tuesday morning won't be in your feeds by the time you go to work if you go to work for a 9-to-5 job. But it will certainly be there by the time that you are on the way home or on your lunch break or while you sit at your desk and not pay as much attention to your job as you're supposed to. Take 5 tomorrow on Milne and Allen and any of the other punt return stuff. And that's the plan, kiddos. Subscribe wherever you are watching or listening right now, and we'll see you tomorrow for Take 5 on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.